Hello YouTube. In this video I'll be giving my own review on the movie Other Conquista, also known in English as The Other Conquest. Before I go any further, I'd just like to say that this movie is suited for adults. There are graphic and some disturbing scenes in this movie, so I just wanted to put that out there before I go any further. The movie takes place in the 16th century, around the start of the Spanish colonial era in Mexico. The protagonist of the movie is the native Aztec scribe named Tauplitzin. Tauplitzin wakes up in an era where Spanish colonialism has already started. Many of his friends and family members have been murdered by the Spanish conquistadors, and he does his best to preserve his culture by staying with his family and avoiding Spanish rule for as long as he can. As the story moves on, Tauplitzin is captured during a sacrificial ritual that he and his grandmother and his brother and other family members were performing at the time. While Tauplitzin does his best to evade capture, he is eventually taken by the conquistadors to the palace of Hernan Cortez. This is where the story starts to get even more interesting, where Tauplitzin meets not only Hernan Cortez, but Cortez's mistress, named Tecuichpo. The story also reveals that Tecuichpo and Tauplitzin are related and the son and daughter of Montezuma, which ultimately saves Tauplitzin from getting a death sentence for resisting the Spanish conquistadors. In exchange for his death sentence, Tauplitzin is forced to convert to Christianity and live the rest of his life in a monastery forever. Tauplitzin's name is also changed to Tomas. And of course, that doesn't come without being flogged in public. The story now moves 5 years later, and Tauplitzin is now living in the monastery as he was sentenced to. This is where the movie starts to get very interesting, as Tauplitzin now must abandon and forget every sort of indigenous cultural practice he might have had, and now accept this new world order in his eyes. I believe that this part of the movie serves the best representation of what exactly happened to a lot of indigenous native people of Mexico, Peru, North America, everywhere on the Americas. Essentially, they were forced to convert to Christianity and abandon most of their indigenous culture and ways to help the Spanish rule, help promote Christianity and Western civilization. The story shows the complex and mental hardships that Tauplitzin must go through in order to completely understand Christianity. There are several instances of this where it shows the statue Virgin Mary and Tauplitzin's reluctance and then acceptance to ultimately giving up his culture, and now not only accepting Christianity, but almost becoming addicted to it in a way. The last part of this movie I wanted to cover was the, I guess you could say, antagonist somewhat to an extent. Essentially, he is working for the conquistadors, is Friar Diego. And Friar Diego does his best to be understanding with the native people. Essentially, in the beginning, though, he did see the indigenous people as savages and not human. Ultimately, he begins to develop an acceptance towards Tauplitzin, but his mind is also warped into coming to terms with accepting indigenous people as humans and not as these savages or aliens in a way. And it affects Friar Diego so much that it also causes him to mentally break down as well. But that's about as much as I'd like to cover for this movie. And I'll start to give my perspectives on what I enjoyed and what maybe I did not. Obviously, again, the first thing that I really liked about this movie was the symbolism of the forced conversion and ultimate abandonment of indigenous culture that native people had to go through. And this happened again everywhere in the Americas. The Spanish did it, the French, the British, and the Dutch as well, to an extent. Because ultimately, without indigenous allies, without native help, the Spanish would not have been able to rule over the Americas and start their process of colonization. The other plus that I really enjoyed about this movie was that it showed the true difference between the Spanish culture and the Aztec indigenous culture and just how otherworldly both cultures were to one another. The other part of this movie I really enjoyed watching was just how effective the conversion was played on the indigenous people. In one part of the movie, we see an indigenous person that is a friar. And in another part of the movie, we see an indigenous woman playing a nun. And then, of course, obviously, in the beginning of the movie, we see Native people being allowed to live and practice their own life. So we see many Native people that either were forcefully converted or maybe perhaps chose to have Christianity be a part of their lives and accept Western civilization. So a couple of the things in the movie that kind of made me scratch my head was in the first part where Toplitzin was taken to Hernan Cortez, correct, because of the resistance that he put up against Friar Diego and the conquistadors. When Toplitzin meets Cortez, Cortez is already in his palace. It's already 1526. So you would like to believe that there's already an administration that's set up to deal with these rebellious native indigenous people and not Cortez. You would feel that Cortez, being the governor of New Spain, he would have other duties that he would likely be working on, and someone below him would be dealing with this instead. Another part of this movie I kind of questioned was, while I believe the director did do well in showing the atrocities that the Spanish committed against the indigenous people, it almost seemed as if the native people were helpless in some ways. And what do I mean by that? When Toplitzin is being flogged by a conquistador, there aren't really any native allies around. In that scene, or through any other scenes of the movie, it seems as if the Spanish conquistadors are the ones that hold all this power and that they're the only soldiers around. And again, as I've brought up in many of my other videos, the native warriors played a huge role in helping secure victory for the Spanish, as well as acting as guards and other positions of power. So all in all, I actually did enjoy this movie quite a lot, despite my objections towards a couple of scenes. But I would recommend this movie to people that are really interested in indigenous history, especially Mexican history. I think that this movie is quite detailed in showing the historical problems that the Spanish created for the indigenous people in terms of conversion, in terms of colonization. And I would recommend this movie to my followers and many other people that would be curious. So that's pretty much my review of this. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to making other content in the future for this channel. And if you like this video, please like. If you're new, try to subscribe or tell your friends. Once again, thank you all for your time in watching this and supporting my content up to this point. It truly is appreciated. The links to this movie on YouTube are in the description. Until next time.